So if there is anyone here who would like to address the planning board as part of privilege of the floor, please raise your Zoom hand, and that should be present over there as an option under your participants panel. And if you don't see your participants panel, then click on near the bottom of your screen where it says participants, and it should open up that panel. So does anybody want to address the planning board? Going once, going twice. Okay, so we're gonna move on then. All right, so as I sent out, I guess it was this last night, a slight modification to the agenda. The first several items are staying the same, and basically a brief overview of what the state's been up to lately, a brief overview of what is all this, three-phase power lines and how is that relevant to our discussion, and a brief discussion of strategic planning. And then where I had been putting in stuff like, oh, I had these questions and let's talk about those. I think it'd be smart to dive right into the law as I have now adapted it for Caroline. And as we go through that piece by piece, you may also have questions that need to be added to these things. This is what we should look at it in more detail before we actually vote on the law.
So would it be appropriate just to pause for a second to introduce the new planning board members?
Thank you. Yes, and I think that that's an excellent idea, which I forgot to do. So thank you, Tim, for that reminder. So at the town board meeting last night, 3 new members were appointed to the planning board. And in a second, I will have Michelle, Barb, and Will introduce themselves. But those who have 6 fingers in one hand can count the 6, therefore, members of the planning board. But the law says there's supposed to be 5. And so the intent, as I understand it, is that very soon, basically in January, the board is going to take up the law that sets up the planning board and make a couple changes to it. And one is which is to expand the membership probably to something that's saying like 5 to 7 or something like that. So in the interim, only 2/3 of each of you is actually a member of the planning board. But at any rate, we'll again, what we're gonna do is basically have some tasks at the end of this meeting, and as long as you're willing to work on those, that's great. Okay, so yeah, in order, Michelle, Barb, and Will, and you have all been given co-host privileges, which means that you are able to unmute yourselves. So just do that one by one and tell us a little bit about yourselves and say hi to me, Catherine, and Val.
Oh, so I'm going first. Hi. So I've lived in Caroline since 1995, and I came to Cornell because I'm a book conservator, and so I've been working at Cornell restoring their rare books since 1995, and I'm in semi-retirement. For the past 2 years, I've been working half-time, and I'll be fully retired at the end of March, so I'm anticipating having all kinds of free time, although I do have a private practice still, so I'm trying to get to the end of my backlog. But anyway, yeah, so I really like it here. I think the people are great. And I grew up near Endicott, New York, so I'm familiar with the area. And I think, as I've mentioned, my grandparents had a dairy farm there. And so we have a lot of family farming tradition in my family. So I guess that's it. Happy to answer questions.
Okay, great, thank you. Barb, you want to talk to us?
Yeah, hi, I'm Barbara Newth. My husband and I moved to the town of Caroline in 1987, having moved to Ithaca in 1986 for my job at Cornell as at that time, assistant professor in the Department of Natural Resources, which is now the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment. And I'm a professor there. My area is environmental policy. I'm also associate director of the Center for Conservation Social Sciences. So I'm more on this interface between kind of environmental science and people, or social sciences. I have been I was involved recently on the town's land use and economic development task force, and that got me interested in learning more and wanting to get involved in the planning board. So here I am, and I'm happy to bring 2/3 of my brain here tonight.
Great. And Will.
Do any of us have more than that at the end of today?
So Will Lawrence, I've been coming to the planning board meetings off and on for 2 years. Maybe it's 2 years now, and mostly in the capacity of just a member of the public, and also project that the county has been working on very actively for the past year. But I've also lived in New York State for a good deal of my life, and all over New York, and came back to the Finger Lakes after I retired from 20 years in the electric power industry in New England. So I came back to the Finger Lakes mostly because I had kept up friendships and I have family not too far away.
Okay, great. And
guess
turnabout is
that's it.
fair play. So how about Val Catherine and myself should introduce ourselves to you. So Val, you want to go first?
Well, okay, I joined a while ago, and I think my term was up a little while ago, and I just started another one. So I could always just sort of leave in case they don't. The rule doesn't work.
No, you can't.
I've lived here since 89 in Caroline, the town of Caroline. I actually went to high school and grew up in Cortland mostly, so I've been around here for quite a while. And let's see, other than that, yeah, I'm also one of the Cornell types, and you know, from the architecture department. And anyway, it's great. I'm really glad to have all this new blood here to be able to welcome people, because I think I'm working on a third of a brain right now.
All right, Catherine.
Sure. Hi. Yes, Cornell type. So hello. You may know me from work as your community consultation and intervention specialist over at Cornell Health and CAPS. So professionally, I'm actually a dual professional. I'm a social worker and a veterinarian. So outside of Cornell, my my professional life is dedicated to like intersection of humans and animals and areas of conflict and connection and all that good stuff. But my professional day job is at Cornell Health. And I've been involved in the Caroline fun, but for years, I don't know, it all started with the noise ordinance for me. So when was that? 2007, 6, something like that. And I just find this whole process like super fascinating, and certainly from like a community organizing and social work perspective, I just like love our community so much. I think this whole past year and a half has been, you know, a testament to all that's been kind of going on there. So welcome new people. I'm so excited and just really grateful for everything that's been going on here.
Great. And I think everyone does know me, because I've known many of you actually personally for a while, but you know, my background is as a physicist. I came to Cornell for grad school in the early 1980s, one of the ones that never left. My wife and I moved here into Caroline in the late 90s on an old farm property, and actually right now we're in the midst of trying to restore some of what has become, you know, largely overly grown shrubby fields into somewhat more diverse wildlife habitat. So that's where a lot of my energy went this fall. And let's see, Tim, you know, maybe you could say a couple things. You are the liaison to the town board.
I am the liaison to the town board, which means that I sit here and watch and sometimes turn on the Zoom meetings. And I'm really happy though that Michelle, Barb, and Will have joined the planning board. It's going to make it really excellent for everybody. There's probably a lot of heavy lifts across the broad area of planning imminently facing us. So welcome.
Great. So, and a brief note on that. So we're definitely sort of jumping into something midstream. We went right from work on the comprehensive plan, which has been the work pretty much of the planning board for the last 6 years. We took a very brief respite to look at the site plan and subdivision laws in terms of energy efficiency a couple of years ago. But for most of us, for the last 2 years, all we've done is comp plan. It's kind of like, oh my God, now what do we do as a planning board? But there is a lot to do. But we've jumped right onto a siting law for solar energy and battery facilities because there is some time pressure. As you see, a lot of these are popping up all over in the area. But what I do hope to do very soon next year is to take a deep breath and have the planning board come together and decide on priorities for the year going forward. So what I will say is, just be patient. The next few meetings are going to be dominated by the solar law. But I think it's time for us to decide what we as a group want to do. And as part of that, of course, is advice from the town board. So Tim, that's your job, is to sort of listen to what the town board wants some advice on. But in addition to that, I think we can set some priorities and think about things that seem important. And looking to the comprehensive plan is certainly a big part of that, because there's definitely a bunch of things sort of indicated there that will be important to pick up on. But anyway, that's going to probably be more like March, the way things are looking right now.
Can I
yes.
add that because Val, I think Catherine and Will were at the meeting last night, so they're aware, but Val, the task force for planning and economic development finished its work Monday night and turned in its report to the town board yesterday. And there are a number of recommendations in that task force report that probably everybody on this planning board will be interested in too. But I'll just mention that. And I doubt it's up yet on the town website, but it should be imminently. And when I find out where it is on the town website, I'll let all of you know.
Okay, great. And the amount of work that the task force put in a brief period of time was truly inspiring and frightening. So what I was about to say about this own board is that, again, we've been meeting a bit more frequently because of the desire to get the comprehensive plan done in a timely manner. In general, we will return to once a month meetings with some work needing to happen in between. Like I say, there's questions we need to answer. I'm hoping 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of work in between meetings, at least, to help sort of track some things down from everybody, because it's certainly more than any one of us can do. That being said, I'm thinking it's likely that in February we will schedule an additional meeting with the desire of trying to get a law completed by early March. For those who were at the meeting last night, there are reasons dealing with expiring tax credits, et cetera, why from a solar standpoint, it would be nice that the regulatory picture was somewhat clear for Caroline early in next year. So we will see how that goes. That does not mean we just have to do the job we can. And if it takes longer, it will take longer. Okay, so I'll be speaking for a little bit and obviously interrupt with questions. Just a brief overview of sort of some state actions. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but the state passed a law, the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. And as part of that, the state was required, there was an Office of Renewable Energy Siting, I think, created, and it was required to put up new rules and regulations within 1 year of the act being passed. And that's the process that's been going on now. They opened up, they issued draft regulations in September of this year, and the comment period on those regulations just closed on December 7th, 2020. My basic understanding, and Irene can help correct on this, is that these regulations basically give the state authority in terms of they give them state control in terms of siting of what they call large major facilities. A major facility is defined as 25 megawatts or more. And that's any renewable energy facility, which could be, solar, could be solar thermal, it could be wind, it could be even covers geothermal, hydroelectric, fuel cells if they aren't powered by fossil fuel resources, anything. It's a broad law in that sense. In their siting decisions, the state has stated that they would, I think, roughly that they would abide by reasonable local zoning and building laws. So while the state is saying we have authority, they're saying, okay, we're willing to pay attention to zoning you've got. Of course, Caroline does not have zoning. These large facilities require pretty bulky transmission lines, pretty heavy duty transmission lines to attach to. And for the most part, Caroline does not have such things. And so the 25 megawatt and above facilities are not likely, certainly not right now for Caroline. I'm going to let Irene chip in 1 second. They are much more likely in Lansing and Groton, and they actually have seen proposals for 100 megawatt facilities. Okay, Irene, are you able to unmute yourself, or do we have to do it for you?
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay, so you want to chip in?
So a little bit of refinement to what Bill described. The state and actually the way the grid is constructed, there's kind of two components. There's what's called transmission, which is major point to major point, like substation to substation, without off-takers, without houses or businesses that are provided by those lines, although big businesses may be provided by a transmission line. Then there are distribution lines, which are typically smaller lines that go to houses and local businesses. The regulation that the state has been working on applies to transmission lines. So 25 megawatt or above installations that are going to be fed into transmission lines and sold on the wholesale market. So those are a few different elements of criteria. There's then what you may have heard of as community solar or local solar farms. Those are required to be on distribution lines and typically have, some number of off-takers within a community, and ideally have some proximity to a substation. To my knowledge, we have only one substation in Caroline. It's on Middaugh Road, sort of just up the road from the Apple Farm place. And it's a relatively small substation right now. It doesn't have a lot of capacity. But I think all of you, maybe Val, you may not have been, but the rest of you I know were on the call last night for the town board meeting where a developer spoke about looking to install solar out in the 76 Road area. One other thing about the distribution lines is that they've got to be what's called three-phase lines. And you'll see this, I've gotten, Judy, now I make her crazy when we go driving on a trip because I'm forever looking at how many wires run along the top of the telephone poles to see if it's a two-phase line or a three-phase line. Three-phase lines are what's needed for solar installations. And we have one three-phase distribution circuit in Caroline. And it does loop through into the 76 Road area. The state limits distribution community solar to 5 megawatts per installation, but there can be multiple installations side by side. So as it happens, the solar installation that they were contemplating out in the 76 Road area, I think was going to be 22 megawatts. Honestly, it could have been 35 megawatts total. So this gets back to the criteria that Bill talked about. It's less important how many megawatts it is as to whether it's feeding into a distribution circuit or a transmission circuit. And so it would have to be identified as, if it were 35 megawatts, then it would be 7 5-megawatt installations. So anyhow, what's needed to do anything like that is to upgrade the substation. And the town will continue to have control over our siting and planning and land use around these community distribution line solar installations. We'll still have some, but it's not clear quite how much, certainly less control over the larger installations that go onto transmission lines.
Okay, so I mean, I'm going to stop you there, I
Yeah.
think, because we do have some maps to show. So, or a
Okay.
quick point, if you want to
Yeah,
finish the quick point,
and
that's fine.
Yeah, I had one last point, and it actually is something that doesn't show on the map, is that we also have in Caroline, Bill is correct that we don't have any major transmission lines in Caroline. But we do have, I'm aware of at least one, what's called a sub-transmission line that doesn't show up on the bulk distribution map that you're going to show.
Right.
But it can be seen running along Coddington Road. It's set back quite a ways. It's up on the hill by where also Arsenal's property is. You can see it way up the hill. I know it runs through in front of Judy's house. So it's somewhere, I forget where, it crosses Coddington Road. And I think that it runs from the substation out on King Road. It may tap into our substation on Minnow Road, and then it goes down to the substation in Wilseyville.
Okay,
So-
I'm going to pause you there. If anyone has questions for Irene on what she just said, let's do that now, because I think this is a good time to move on to the maps. And then that'll be sort of covering all our bases there. So go ahead, Catherine.
I guess I have a question about, so Irene, you're probably familiar with the Stevenson Road situation.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so the whole Dryden project that goes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Turkey Hill, right. So would you consider that, and then, so there was, the issue of the panels, but something that this team has talked about, and I know will continue to, is this idea of the panels are one thing, but what doesn't get discussed is, oh, by the way, there's now going to be like a mini, I don't know what you call that. My question for you, if you are familiar with that, is what those poles that got erected on Stevenson Road, which was never discussed at any of those meetings, is that considered a now substation, or is that a mini version of a substation, or like, what is that?
Yeah, I haven't gone to look, so I don't fully know, Catherine, but my guess is that they are just wires, transmission lines. A substation is it's like a chunky thing on about a half acre or more, up to many acres of land, and it's got all kinds of equipment and machinery and lots of wires coming into it.
Right.
I
So my
mean,
impression is that whatever they put there did not meet the threshold of calling it a substation, and therefore it was never up for discussion. And obviously when it showed up, it was quite a surprise to many people.
yeah, I don't know quite the story on that, and some of it may be an inverter. I know that one of the issues was that that they thought that a lot of the infrastructure was going to be buried, and it wasn't. And apparently NYSEG doesn't have the knowledge or skill to bury some of it. So anyhow, it's been renegotiated. There were new owners. It has been, kind of a cluster mess.
Okay.
I started
All right,
to remember we're being recorded, but anyhow.
Yeah. Well,
It's been a real mess. But depending on the size of the project, so that is also considered a community solar farm. Although it was done in multiple 2 megawatt parcels. At the time, the state was only allowing solar, community projects, distributed circuit projects to be 2 megawatts, although again, side by side, 2 megawatts. And so I'm not super familiar with what the actual infrastructure is on Stevenson Road, although I can drive by and take a look.
Okay. So thanks, Irene, for that. And relevant to that is the law we're looking at says things should be buried. And it'll be interesting that that's what's supposed to happen. And then the applicant says at the last moment, no, I can't do that. Well, hopefully we'll have some recourse at that point. Okay, so let's move on to the maps. Yes. So
Could
go
I
ahead, Will.
add a
Yes.
couple comments?
Sure.
Okay, so I listened to Doreen Harris, who's in charge of the projects for under this new law, and also to the attorneys that have interpreted the implementation, and there were a couple things that are probably good to bring up that they emphasize. And one is that if it's a large project, it will go to the siting office. But if it's a small project like community solar, they fully expect it to go through a seeker review by local towns. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up. They were real clear about that. The other thing is they said they are not interested in projects that are already going. So, for instance, what's going on in Lansing, they're not looking at the project as far as I know, because that's underway. The analysis, the studies, and the siting, they're basically a transmission group with a few people added. And their priorities are, because they're basically trying to take the risk out of the whole process. And I'll talk about that in January. But the point is, they're going to, as much as possible, use NYPA right-of-ways, which we don't have. And they're going to be looking at what they call underutilized sites first, which would be, for instance, brownfields. So like if the Cayuga site wasn't currently under negotiation, that probably would come up on their radar. And, if the whole thing fails, maybe it will come up on their radar. But more importantly, for the small projects, they're not going to go out looking for the small projects. They have promised a procedure for communities to bring the small projects forward. The other point I want to make, and this is apropos to the map you're about to show.
Okay, Will, I think we're getting down in the weeds a little bit, so go ahead and make your last point. But
yeah, it's just one point. It's really important. As Irene said, we have one circuit, and on that map, when you look at it on the web, it tells you that there's already 5 megawatts in the queue.
Right.
There's no room for more projects to be considered. And the project that's currently under consideration is 5 megawatts by Nexamp.
Right.
And they're in the study phase.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring that up when we show that map, and then you and Irene can chat at the time. So let me move on to the maps, and then we'll get to that, because exactly that point I was going to bring up. And one other sort of scaling thing, it takes about, depending on the technology, 5 to 10 acres to produce a megawatt of power. I think Irene used the number of 6 megawatts to me, 6 acres per megawatt in something she wrote to me. So, a 25 megawatt project is, 130 acres. So they do start to gobble up some area. And obviously a 2 or 5 megawatt is that much smaller. But let me try to share my screen, and we can see these maps that we've been sort of talking about. So let's see if I'm enabled to do that. Yeah. And there it is. All right, so you should all be seeing something that says bulk electric substations and transmission lines. Everybody got that? Okay. So first off, based on all these maps, often they are very crude, and I believe often that is on purpose. For anti-terrorism reasons, often critical infrastructure is not well represented. So this is sort of it looks like someone drew almost with a Sharpie on a map of New York State. But, here we are in here, and I'm about to zoom in on that. But, there are these big transmission lines that are high voltage and typically high capacity in terms of how many megawatts of power they can take. And if we zoom into our town here, so there's where the Cuckoo Power Plant sort of was, and no surprise, there's a big transmission line that went to there. So this cuts right through Lansing and then a bunch through Dryden. And so this is, for this reason, it's much more like, I think, some big products might indeed be located here. And then moving on to us in Caroline, these are one of the distribution circuits that Irene was talking about. And the substation is over here on Middall Road. And a big line runs down here, basically down Old 76 Road. And this is the area where the developer was, had some, interest in setting up some stuff. The red and brown color doesn't show up so well here. But yeah, these are relatively low power lines, maxed out already, as well as the substation here being maxed out. There was a comment made last night, I think by Tony Tavelli, that they would be upgrading 2 miles of line. So Irene, a question for you: was that, as far as you know, part of the project? And if so, who pays that? Is the developer paying that? Is NYSEG paying that? Which eventually means we do through our rates eventually.
Yeah, it's the developer pays for all of the improvements. And one of the improvements, in addition to whatever changes to the lines are needed, would be to expand the substation.
Okay, so that would all be one package. And again, the developer's on the hook for that.
Yeah, the developer's on the hook for that. Yeah.
Okay, and so my expectation is that then feeds into their calculus of, okay, so how many acres, how big do I have to build to get that money back? So,
That's correct. That's exactly right.
and that's why they.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I wasn't at the beginning of the meeting with the developer last night. Is this, where does this energy, where is it proposed to go? Back into the grid for everyone, or?
Yeah, it would feed into the distribution circuit and into the substation where it could go in multiple directions. But yeah, it would be on the distribution circuit level. And, potentially feeding, it's quite a bit more megawatts than what we would need in Caroline. We probably need about 6 megawatts to power all the homes in Caroline. Right now, we'll need more than that as we electrify more, go to electric heating and electric vehicles.
But there's no
But-
specific end point, like the one in Dryden is basically Cornell. This is not.
Right. The one in Dryden is Cornell has what's called a power purchase agreement to buy the power from it. For one parcel of it. The other one that's not yet been built and has still been under litigation
Right.
is
right.
intended as a community distributed.
Okay. I think that's just important for like town discussion, because I think I went to all the Dryden meetings and it was all a question of like, well, this is great, but like none of this, like I have a friend who backs on that solar project and actually,
Yeah, Leslie. Yeah.
no, a different person. But anyway,
Oh, okay.
like where the power is going to go from the developer.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. The power just goes into the grid. And electrons, I mean, there's a lot of physics behind it, and this is a radical simplification, but electrons ostensibly move at the speed of light. So they just go into the grid, and nobody, whoever the off taker is, there's no way to know which electrons are feeding them, whether it's coming from a coal plant, a nuke plant, a gas powered plant, or a solar farm or wind farm or whatever. It's just electrons. But there's something called RECs, which is a way of monetizing the greenness of certain electrons. It's a certificate for every megawatt of green energy that you generate, you have a REC to sell on the market. And Cornell is buying the RECs, which helps to subsidize the development, and also means that they own the greenness of the electricity that they're pulling from the grid.
Okay, and I'm going to stop it there again, just mindful of the time, that in about an hour, and I'll get to you second, Barb, if that's fine. We are going to run about another hour, because I do want us to end soon enough that the town board has time to open up their meeting and get people in for the public hearing at 7 o'clock. And this is all good, but not as directly applicable to the siting law. And it's, again, Irene, you are well steeped in it because of all the work you've been doing, and we should probably learn more about it. But Barb, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering in relationship to the maps that you're showing, is there also like an overlay map that would show what land areas are conducive to solar, to placing solar, like because of slope or, facing or, whatever?
We don't have that now, and that's an excellent segue for about a minute from now into the strategic siting discussion. And so we'll talk about that. That's an excellent point and question. I just
Yeah.
wanted to point out that this other sub transmission line Irene was talking about is kind of over in here. If you can see my little cursor moving back and forth. It does cross over by Osefsky over into here somewhere, crosses Cottington Road and then up. I think probably, like you're saying, to the King Road station makes sense. And then I don't really know where it goes down here.
Yeah, I know it runs through
Probably
Judy
towards
property and ends up down in Wilseyville.
Yeah. so
And I
somewhere
think there's
down in there.
another sub-transmission line. I'm gonna see if I can find a person at NICEAG who can provide information on the sub-transmission circuits that or lines that may run through Caroline, because I think there's another one.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to stop this screen
But
share.
according to the map,
Yeah, Will?
according to the map, that line, there's a feeder that goes to George Arsenault's house, but it does not continue on to the Wentworth property. Wentworths are fed from the opposite direction on a different feeder line.
Yeah, we'll again,
That's not continuous.
okay. So I think that, again, good point. Let's look at that in more detail.
You're talking about the lines that are halfway up the hill in the cow field,
Yeah, I am.
in the pasture. Yeah, it doesn't continue. It's on the map.
Okay, so that's something we will,
But
I
you,
think,
I mean, you can check with them.
yeah. So I think, both ground truthing and looking at the maps we can do
Yeah.
in the future. Not something we need to deal with today. I'm going to be a little rigid about that. Okay, so which brings us to this question, important point that Catherine brought up last meeting about, hey, this sounds like we sort of might need a strategic plan, at least an understanding of where these things might go, which is part of the reason I showed the maps. I agree completely. As I argued in the note to all of you, it's unclear how much control the town can exert over those siting decisions because they are partly dictated by where power lines are. And there's a whole other chunk of this, which is that the New York State is encouraging more power lines to be built exactly because we need them to bring more power online. And an open question whether any of that would ever happen in Caroline because of our topography, et cetera, et cetera. So whether it's likely to happen here, where it's likely to happen, whether the town has any authority are all big questions that I think need addressing, but a little later from now. So that's my argument that I agree the strategic plan and thinking is vital. As Barb pointed out, let's get a map that kind of shows us something about this. Great. I don't know if we have sort of the bandwidth to cope with that right now at the same time that we're looking at the siting law. But as always, I'm willing to be beaten into submission by the rest of the committee. But that's my position, and that's what I want us to talk about for a few minutes is, do we decide to hold off on a strategic plan that is those issues are something we deal with a few months from now, or do people really feel it's important to be working on that in parallel with the siting law?
This is Barb, and I'm weighing in here, given that I've been part of the planning board for all of 45 minutes now, with 2/3 of my brain. But I guess the question that comes to my mind is, given that there's a 100-day moratorium on development, I think it applies to solar developments, that it would seem to me that the planning board might be mindful of that. And given that it was a 3-2 vote of the town board, it's not entirely clear to me that it would be likely to extend that moratorium for a good chunk of time. So, in some sense, kind of anticipating that there's going to be interest in solar development. We know that because of the old 76, Chet and Tony comments last night, that it might be wise to develop the facility law solar energy and storage facility law to have that in the town's back pocket. So if the 100-day moratorium is not continued, the town at least has something, because my guess is that to truly do a strategic plan, it would run beyond that time period.
Just a clarification, it's a 180-day moratorium.
What did I say?
It sounded like 100, but you may
Oh,
probably
180,
up here
yeah.
it was 180, and by the time
That,
it came
that
up
was
to
my
two-thirds, it
two-thirds,
was-
yeah,
yes.
okay, 180.
I just want to second everything that Barb just said.
Okay, Irene?
Yeah, one other thing, and this actually goes back to the earlier thing that Barb said, is the other thing that I think is valuable in knowing the maps and seeing where things potentially could be sited is to be able to keep that in mind as, I guess it won't be this group, but to keep it in mind as zoning ideas are being put forward, so that, you know, hopefully there can be, you know, a zoning plan that would allow in certain areas to have the solar developed there, you know, based on the other criteria that you guys are going to help figure out. But to be mindful of where it might go, and to the extent that we want to encourage it, to have zoning align with that.
Okay, and I think that the other, I think, am I hearing any objections to sort of setting that aside in favor of making sure we get a good siting law in place first? All right, so I think that's what we're going to do. I do want to add to that, you know, what we heard last night from the developer was that sort of, you know, what they hate is uncertainty. Like, you know, tell me what the rules are, I'll make sure I fall within them. And so his suggestion was, I just need clarity by, say, March. Now, zoning is a different set of things, but if at least we have like a site plan review law and a solar siting law where like they're in final or nearly final form, that may give him enough clarity of where the town's going to be at, that he feels he can proceed, and maybe not, you know, we'll see. So I think that at least having, you know, the I's dotted and T's crossed would be a good idea, that we have the whole picture laid out. Then yes, zoning might yank the rug out from underneath them if they says, no, there can be no solar facilities in this sector of town, but I think that's unlikely. Okay, so with that, I will share my screen of the law, if I can pull that off. There it is. All right, so as you guys should all be seeing that now, as I mentioned in the note, if it's yellow, it's often something I added, like it's 2021, rather than 2020 in the Lansing law, but basically this is Lansing's law. Now, that was only about March of last year, but things have moved, a lot's going on. And also, frankly, I'm not comfortable saying, well, it was good enough for Lansing, so it's good enough for us. I think we need to understand why choices were made in the law, why it's structured the way it is, and figure out how to best adapt it to Caroline. Along the line, sometimes there are definitions or a threshold where it's big if it's this big and small if it's not, that I've sent to the Lansing planner. And I think I wrote each of you. She's very happy to answer, but really busy right now, probably because she was very busy putting in comments in on that big state law. So we are sort of scheduled to get answers from her in early January. But I thought it'd be useful to go through this law section by section and figure out what things we do want to follow up on further. And I know that Don Barber, I believe, has joined the call. He is chair of Energy Independent Caroline, and they also looked at this law. And then he and I have chit-chatted back and forth by email about a few things, and those will probably come up as we go through. In terms of authority, it says to be fixed by town lawyer. Again, Lansing was able to anchor their law in the ability to do zoning, which we can't do, at least not yet. But there are other things in municipal home rule law that will give us authority to do this. So he just needs to add in or take out state law as necessary to give us the authority to do what we're doing. So next, that brings us to purpose. I'm still not going to read it out loud. Some of you have looked at this law. any comments on the purpose section. And I'm not going to necessarily see everybody nodding or shaking heads because you don't all appear here. So feel free to unmute yourself and say something if you do want to say something.
Looks good.
All right. So
I had a, I'm sorry. I did have a question, and that's, yeah, I realize this is solar sighting, and it's good that you put the battery in, and I think it's in the section where you refer, yes, independent battery and energy storage. And I wondered, is that really what you want this to cover? Because that's a whole different animal. So my recommendation would be to only cover it in conjunction with the solar equipment, not independent. It's the fourth line down.
yeah, no, I see. I'm trying to run my cursor back and forth over it. Do you guys see it moving back and forth? Yeah. So, okay, good question, Will. This is one of those things that just got grandfathered in from the Lansing law. And we may want some advice from the town lawyer on, because he was their lawyer too, as to why they incorporated independent battery as well. So I assume the related battery would be something that's part of the actual solar photovoltaic system. I assume an independent battery would not necessarily be associated with, it might just be a battery bank that's used to help load, ease load. They do peak load stuff. I'm not sure. Maybe Irene has a comment on that. I don't know what is really meant by an independent battery storage system.
Yeah, I'm not super up to speed on storage policies, but I think that typically they are coupled with renewable generation, and that they take the excess that isn't
Well,
put into the
it
grid.
depends on what it's being used for, and the original Lansing law was also about wind.
Right.
And right now the trend, along with your wind or along with your solar, to increase their value in the marketplace. There are uses for independent battery systems, but I don't think that's what you want to cover in here.
Yeah,
So Will, what I'm going to suggest is, could you, because I'm not adding this, because this goes into our questions to answer. Could you write up a quick thing, not right now, I mean, between now and next meeting, that explains, as you understand it, what the independent battery system would be? And so I really don't fully get what it is. I don't want to deal with that during the meeting, but I want to understand the terms. I want to understand what related battery storage and independent battery storage are. And if you know that already, then write down and send us that. That's my suggestion for right now. And then at next meeting, we can decide to take that in or out, once we all know what we're talking about. Sound fair, everybody? All right. Okay. All right. So applicability is what I dropped out of there, was where I had said wind. And again, part of the rationale I have is that wind is sort of a whole nother set of issues, because of issues with towers and, sound, as well as wildlife. It's a different set of wildlife issues than you have with solar systems. I want us to do that, but not now, because there's really no proposals for wind power system in Caroline. It doesn't look like we're likely to, given the wind resources in town. So we can, I think, safely put that off for a number of months or a year.
yeah, wind projects are usually much bigger and tie into much bigger transmission lines than we have here, Bill. I think it's pretty unlikely.
Yeah. Okay. So in the definition section, I'm going to move on to there. So I threw this in because they use the term alternative energy system in the law. And my guess is that somewhere in Lansing law or zoning, they already had defined that. We may be able to remove the word where it appears later in the law. I'm not sure. But if we keep it in, we need to define it because it's one of those capitalized words that has a specific meaning for the law. So I just threw that in and I didn't want to create one. And I would just probably, copy that. And it's worth, I don't know how many, have had time to really look at the law. We do need to look carefully at each definition because that's where you get in trouble sometimes. But basically they do, in here is where they set some of the thresholds. Is this a big thing or a smaller thing? But they define what a battery energy storage system is. Building integrated, clearly it basically are somehow attached to a building. And that's key in some extent when you start talking about building permits and loading, et cetera. Commissioning, decommissioning. There is a decommissioning procedure in the law, last section. And I think that's important, particularly for Caroline, the idea of remediating the land. It's something we started to put into our comprehensive plan and the task force looked at in terms of the site plan law.
Yeah, Bill, I want to
Yes.
suggest that an assignment to Will is, I think the energy storage definition needs some polish too.
Okay. If Will's willing, that's great. So what I threw in here, this is, again, they had a different name for the law in Lansing. So this is what our, how it appears in our site plan review law. So I just copied and pasted it here because the actual law has a very convoluted title, a local law for flood damage prevention, da, 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 da. So to make things cleaner in the document, I think they just called it flood damage prevention local law, and that's how it's referred. So that's why this is in yellow. I added it to refer to Caroline's law in a more concise way, just as it's done in our site plan review law. I changed the nameplate capacity because that's the physicist in me coming out. You don't, the output is not rated in alternating current. It's just apples and oranges. So I just changed the wording to be what seemed reasonably accurate, but that can be doctored up. Obviously the difference between, they define non-participating, participating residents. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
So I had quite a bit of heartburn over the choice of a 280 kilowatt hour cutoff.
Right.
Do you know why they chose that?
That is one of the questions I asked Lansing. So I think all of those threshold questions are something we should discuss, but not tonight because we don't have any information on them. I want to hear from CJ Randall of Lansing, what background research they did, because it might be that then we'll know, oh yeah, that was a reasonable wise choice, we might not. So I agree. All of there's discussions of, well, if the solar panels are, can't go more than 18 feet high when they're at, maximum tilt. I don't know if 18 feet is the right number or not. I want to know why that number is in there. So I think it's a good question. And we'll have to, I think we will be treating it probably in January after we get some more information on it. But at the meantime, I think it is reasonable if anyone on this committee would like to go poking around on that, either looking at other towns that have laws or what sort of the industry considers, is there a threshold after which something becomes more dangerous, more important, more something?
One thing I'm aware of as they get higher is that wind becomes more of an issue. And so they like to keep them somewhat lower.
Okay, makes sense. And it might be that then there's like a threshold where above, then suddenly you have to have much beefier structures, and that's much more ugly or much more expensive or much more something. That's what I want to understand. So why was it 18 feet, for example? Everything else is pretty much what they had. And indeed, as Will pointed out, they call a small scale battery energy storage system less than 280 kilowatt hours. Why that number? Do not know yet, but I think we should find out. Stop me if I'm scrolling
Can
past
I
something.
make another comment about the battery stuff? This law, when it comes to batteries, is really behind, and it's not in sync with fire codes for the state. It's not in sync with the industry at all. And I can, include helpful information when we have time. But I just want to say, I think any reference to size or type needs to really hark back to some other source or some other law, because otherwise it'll be out of date as soon as you pass the law. But if you tie it back to like the fire code or something like that, there's no, the size, the significance of the size depends on the type of battery, for one thing.
Okay, so I think that's a good
So
point.
I don't want to,
Good. So
I don't
and-
want
and
to say
where-
too much because I
Okay.
know you want to keep going.
Well, and these laws are sometimes like onions. You got to kind of peel your way in, so I do want to make sure we get through some of it, because if we start bearing down on one little thing, not only do we not get anywhere, but it's like you don't always fully understand. So it does take a amount of time to build some expertise. I think what you say is a good point, but it also takes a little bit of legal advice. How do we best not become out of date right away? Sometimes you have to put some kind of number in, or as you say, there's sometimes a code you can apply to, and that makes a lot more sense. The other time, you don't want to necessarily tie yourself to an outside authority. Maybe the local community wants to be the one that says, for us, this makes more sense at this level. So those are all good points, but a little bit thorny. And so I think it might take some legal advice to know what we could or should refer to outside in terms of a code or a regulation to do that. So I think that's, again, it's going to take some research and figuring. They define solar thermal system here. They actually never deal with it, as far as I can tell, much in the law. But again, I may have to read it through it again. But fine, But the solar thermal system, as opposed to a solar electric or solar PV system, focuses the sun's rays with basically the inverse of a magnifying glass, but like you used to maybe do, at least I did as a little boy, burning up leaves and the occasional ant. But at any rate, they're just focusing the energy on a fluid, making it hot, and then that fluid does work, as opposed to directly converting the photons into electricity inside the semiconductor. So this is the other big addition, is something called the visual impact assessment, and I added that, again, stolen from a draft revision of the site plan law, because later on it talks about visual issues. And Val, this is something you've brought up, so how do we sort of do that or quantify that? And I think that the site plan law revision tried to answer that you're right, there should be some procedure that is gone through to try to do some sort of assessment of the visual impact. So that's what this is here. So I've sort of scrolled quickly through all the definitions. Does anybody want to bring anything else up about definitions at this point? All right. So here's where that alternative energy systems
Bill,
word appears.
I'm sorry, I couldn't
Go ahead.
unmute myself. Just quick footnote. The task force was also recommending the possibility of a TEACR in addition to a seeker, and
Right.
probably it would fit in here.
I explained that. I agree and remember that, but what do you mean but would fit in here?
Pursuant to a seeker or a TEACR. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
Right, I see. Right.
Even though
right
we don't
there.
have a TEACR yet.
So we could put the language in referring to TEACR, even though we don't have one yet, so that when one was created, if it was created, that would be applicable without changing the law. Okay. Sorry, just writing the note down. Okay.
A guy might take it out.
Yeah. Okay, so this is where alternative energy systems word appears and conceivably could be replaced with solar power and battery energy storage systems and avoid the need to define the term. Again, this was numbered differently in the Lansing law because it was making amendments to their existing zoning code, or we can define what we mean by alternative energy systems and leave this language as is. But basically, I'll get as much of this on the screen as I can at one time. Look through this, and I'm just going to call for questions or comments on this section right now.
Yeah, I have the comment, which is if they're upgrading part of what they're making, is that a separate consideration?
Okay,
Is it
well,
covered elsewhere?
so if you're upgrading as opposed to routine or minor general maintenance, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because it could be like a replacement. And sometimes when like when I replaced my furnace, I upgraded it.
Right. So
So my new system has a totally different technology.
all right, so do you have a suggestion of what you like a limitation that not if the equipment is substantially upgraded? I'm not sure of language. What are you thinking about?
Maybe what is intended here is the replacement is with same or similar equipment. You know, what is the intention? Is that the intention that it's talking about what do you do if you're just replacing something that's broken, or are you actually upgrading?
So my understanding of the intent of this obviously is they did not want a lengthy review process when the owner of the project was going in there to basically make repairs or do their other normal maintenance. They wanted to exclude routine and minor general maintenance repair. So I think that basically we may have to, I think an upgrade is not covered by this exclusion. So an upgrade would require an additional site plan review as I read the wording here. Are you thinking that that's good enough, Will, or do you want there to be a more explicit thing? Or are you saying they ought to be able to upgrade without review?
I think that an upgrade, I think the town should at least be informed of an upgrade. And it may end up being a nothing burger, because it doesn't change anything, or it may actually make a difference and you don't know until. So if the replacement is with different equipment, I think you might want to know.
Okay, so I think that's what would happen, but other people on the
Let me
committee want
put
to
it this
comment?
way.
Yeah,
It-
Irene,
you
1 second.
know-
Go ahead, finish, Will.
It may make a difference. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're not hearing you. Will, you still there? We may have lost her.
I'm here.
Okay, great. So did you fit? Because I lost the last part of your sentence. Finish that, and then I'm going to see if other planning board members have something to say, and then we'll go to Irene. And if there's anybody else, I don't see everybody, of course. So again, you have to just talk unless you're someone who can't just do that.
This is Barb. So I guess I have a question that I read this that if it's replacement of 50% or more, it would have to go to the town again. And so I guess is Will's question that any replacement should go to the town, no matter how small it is? Because I think the current language covers 50% or more replacement.
I think her question is, let's say they only replace 25% of it, but they managed to upgrade the thing so it becomes something substantially different, even though they only changed 25%. what happens in that case. I
Right,
think-
and I guess that's what I'm asking. If her point is that any upgrade, no matter how small of a portion of the facility, should go before the town, yeah, that's not how I read the current language. That seems, I mean, that seems a little much to ask.
Agree.
You know, I get that there's you know, concerns about cumulative effect, that you know, they can upgrade 49%, you know, one year, and then a year later upgrade, you know, another 49%, and they've, you know, essentially upgraded it all. But I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about being, you know, too prescriptive here, you know, with small changes.
Okay, I think Catherine seems to be in agreement with that.
Yeah, agree, totally. I'm worried, we're worried about something that's just not a concern. That's a priority right now.
Okay, anybody else on the planning board? Then we'll take comment from Irene.
Well, I think it's typical actually of a lot of codes anyway, that if there's something that's done to alter even a building by more than 50% of its value, assessed value, or change its thing, that it has to be submitted for you know, sort of all new documentation and things like that. Not only that, but it's also then required to be brought up to whatever the new code might be, so that it has to develop new compliances that it would not have otherwise had. And I think it makes sense as it says.
I agree. I guess I'm not clear on like what the concern is really. Like what's the outcome that would be undesirable?
No, it was more a matter of just wanting to know what it meant. I'm not
Okay,
suggesting anything. It's just that when I read it, I wasn't
okay.
sure what
All right.
it meant.
So I think, and I'll take Irene in a second. I think it says replacement right here. And so I think replacement, obviously you can upgrade when you replace. So I think that it covers it, you know, it just says, as long as you're doing less than 50%, don't come talk to us about it. And if you're doing more than 50%, upgrade or not, then, you know, then it is. You have to talk to us. Okay, Irene, you wanted to say a couple words?
Yeah, the town has subscribed to the New York State's Uniform Solar, I forget what they're called, something Uniform Solar permitting thing, and that's for individual residential. And so it sounds like this is applying to individual residential, and I tend to agree that it, you know, is maybe overkill, but I think it'd be worth looking at what the Uniform Solar permitting permit allows and dictates to help understand this and put it in context. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, I will add uniform solar permitting to our list.
Yeah, and it's for residential, and the code officer probably should have
Yeah.
a copy of that.
Yeah, but this clearly, to me, covers, you know, it's solar energy systems, nice big capital letters, you know, which this covers both small and this covers everything from residential to commercial installations in Lansing. So it would here as well, as far as I know.
Bill, I mean, we might just consider adding replacement, upgrade, or repair.
Yeah, that's what I'm sort of thinking, but look. Yeah. I have the add upgrade question mark in here. So everyone keep that in mind, and we're gonna eventually be looking at each paragraph and doing the little words in them. So I added, for some reason, they didn't mention battery storage systems in the Lansing law in this section, which puzzled me. It could have been that they referred to codes later on in the document and I just missed it. But anyway, I stuck them back in here. Why did I take this one out? Oh, so this is a debatable question. That's why I left it in with strikeout. So this is an exemption for farm properties, where as long as whatever's being installed is basically for use on the premises up to 110%, because that's sort of, you know, what typically you can do. That's what I can do on my system here. Are exempt from any review. I'm wondering I would think this would apply to all residential systems, not just farm systems. But so I flagged it this way because I thought it was worthy of discussion, whether we wanted to have a specific, should we have something that says that any system that's primarily on premises and 110% is exempt from review? Or do we want there to be review of residential systems, but not farm systems? So I think that's a worthwhile thing to discuss right now.
Do you know what the rationale between the farm or the ag exemption was?
I don't, and I think I didn't notice it at the time I wrote questions on Lansing, and so I'm happy to add that to the list. I will do that right now.
I guess I'd just be curious, make sure we're not missing something.
Excellent idea.
And
Any
again,
other-
like grid tied, then it goes back to the original question of what Irene was saying. And of course, that we know full well with a grid tied system on our farm, which is like, okay, we're producing energy, but it's not, unless you have batteries and you're fully off the grid and then powering your individual farm, it's really all just math. So I would just want to make sure I'm not missing something with farming, if maybe this is talking about a system that's not grid tied somehow, but that wouldn't make much sense to me.
Yeah. I think it's a great question to pass on to Lansing. I agree. And so we'll do that and to discuss this further when we get an answer from them. 5.6 originally read that all alternative energy systems require building permits, and then right in the next section, they exempted some of them from needing a building permit. That sounded a little weird, so I just made note of the fact that it could be exempted below, and yeah, so obviously a grid tied solar system, maybe you have that, you definitely have to have stuff with the utility, they have to know what's going on. Okay. Here's the thing on building permits, and Don and I have talked about this a bit. I think he and I are now sort of understanding what the language is, doing an agreement on it. The original law didn't have the words "that are" in here, and it was a little convoluted. I had to sort of try to figure out what it really meant, but I think the intent is that if you're putting in a pretty small system, 1,000 watts, and you didn't attach it to a building, then you don't need a building permit. But even if it's tiny and you're putting it on top of your roof or on a shed, then you need a building permit for that. And I think the rationale is that then it should be made sure that your roof can withstand the snow load. It's one thing for you to take that risk. This is how I view it. But you might sell that structure to someone 5 years from now, and the town, I think, has some vested interest in making sure that you did a safe job. You can take the risk on, but you shouldn't be passing that risk on to other people. That's how I view this. So I added the words "that are" to sort of make the meaning of the sentence to me a little more clear. And the Energy Independent Caroline raised a question, and I think at this point, Tim, I don't know if I can, if you can find Don and unmute him. In case he wants to help chime in as we go along, that would be good. So Energy Independent Caroline threw up this question about the 1,000 watts. That's sort of like maybe a 10 by 10 square foot area, and wondering if that was too low a threshold for this exemption. Honestly, personally, I have no idea. So again, I'm opening this up for thoughts. Don, if you're in on the call, you can tell us what you guys were thinking about.
Don doesn't seem to be with us.
Okay, he was earlier. Darn. Okay, I guess we were that boring.
Last night he was having connection problems, so it could be.
Yeah. So I think that could be added as a again. I think there's no way we could decide that. Oh no, it should be 1,500 watts. Based on I don't know squat about what the right number would be. They raised it as a question that we could look at whether that should be a different number. I'm happy to add it to our list of things to look at. If people think we should, or should we just leave it at 1,000 watts and say fine?
This is Barb. I mean, with all of the numbers that are in here, it seems to me that we should at least have an understanding of why we're choosing these numbers.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Okay, I think I probably already asked Lansing why it was 1,000, but I will make sure we do. And again, get feedback from Energy Independent Caroline on their thinking on a different number and why.
Bill, I reconnected, so I missed part, and I read 5.7 that we consider the possibility of a preliminary permit because people may run into a situation where they want some kind of permit from the town before they can proceed with their other processes they have to go through. But here we're saying we want proof from the utility before we give the permit. So
I
someone could
don't,
end up in catch 22.
I don't read it that way because it only says that you have to say that you informed the utility that you intend to do this. It doesn't say you have to have gotten some approval from the utility company before we give you a permit. That's how I read that quickly. Anybody else want to?
5.7, it says, including the receipt of documentation from said utility that it will connect the system.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But you have to have that, or else they're not going to hook you up. As someone who's,
Yeah.
that's just going to happen automatically, or else you can't have your system.
So I think what Will's asking, and I don't know if this would happen or not, is, okay, so you need a building permit. And to get a permit from us, you have to tell us that you've talked to the utility and that they've given you something that says they will connect the system and we'll give you a permit until you do that. And does the utility ever say, well, we're not going to promise you that until you show that you have a building permit? I don't know if that occurs. That summarize your concern, Will?
Yeah, it's in the new act.
You mean the state?
It's-
Are you talking about the state act?
Yeah,
Okay, well, that may
Yeah.
be different because that's huge
and
system.
also it may be part of the problem with, well, no, but they're doing small systems too.
That state act only applies to 25 megawatt and above systems, as I understand it. We're leaving us
No,
to
it's
regulate
got
small.
small systems too.
Okay, that's a misunderstanding on my part. Apologize for that. We should look into that. Indeed, one of my issues was to understand better the federal preemption and the state preemption or not. I'm guessing it's a non-issue, but again, happy for us to look into it, that in general, the utility would agree to connect you, particularly if you told them, I need that to get my building permit. I don't know if they would have any reason to withhold their approval saying, no, tell us you got a building permit, then we'll talk to you. It wasn't a problem when we put our system in on our house here either. But again, I'm willing to hear from other members on the planning board if we have any idea, or should we just look into it harder?
You're including community solar though, which
Yes.
is much bigger than your house.
Yes. And indeed, if
Plus,
NYSEG said,
Community solar can be,
so if NYSEG told this developer, no, we will not let you connect to our lines, even if you're willing to pay to upgrade them, then sure enough, they shouldn't get a building permit from the town. I don't see the conflict there. It's only if the utility's telling them, no, we can't sign off on this until you show us you have a building permit. Again, maybe someone should call NYSEG and say, would you ever do that? I mean, I don't know if they would. It doesn't seem to make sense that they would. So I guess I don't see a conflict here. Or a catch-22. Anybody else want to chime in?
I think the processes are changing because it's something between okay, I wouldn't assume that 5 megawatts is the upper limit under the new law for the small solar process. But at the federal level, 5 megawatts can participate in the market. And once you want to participate in the market, all the rules change. So it might not happen. I'm just saying that I think you should leave room there for the possibility that should the utility require a permit prior to their commitment to connect to the system, maybe people should, confer.
Okay.
But if you leave the law this way, think of it from the review board
It's
point
fine.
of view.
So Will, here's what I'm going to
Put it
suggest.
down.
I think you brought up a good point. So I would like you to draft what you think would be sensible language, and then the committee will talk about it either January, February meeting. Because I don't want to spend a lot of time right now on that point, but I also don't want to ignore that the issue you've raised. So why don't you, if you can think of a way to change the language in here to avoid that box, that catch-22, that would be great. And then we'll decide whether or not to incorporate it. Because I hear you. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Thank
great.
you.
And I realize I'm probably giving really bad incentive that says if you speak up, you're about to get an assignment. So I don't want to leave that definite impression. There'll be questions to answer. And I hope everyone will take some of them on. But this is something where I think Will has some expertise. I think it'd be great if she could pursue it. All right. So,
I'm happy to.
okay, great. Thank you. I just feel like I've been like dumping on you, and I didn't mean to do that.
No. This is my bailiwick. This is my bailiwick.
All right, great. Okay, so section 6.2 and 6.3. So they were modifying zoning stuff. And so that's why sub-point 3 was struck here, because these required open space, et cetera, things are often part of a zoning ordinance where they talk about, the yardage rules and lot coverage. We don't have anything like that. So I just lopped that one off. I do like the sentiment that to the maximum extent practicable, and practical, by the way, is defined in the law, if you didn't notice that earlier, must not obscure, architectural details or features. We don't want it probably on some rickety old thing that's about to fall apart. So, I thought those 2 points made sense to retain. In terms of ground-mounted systems, here's that 18-foot thing that I think we're going to have to probe deeper on. The other 3 points, again, seem to be zoning related. Yardage requirements, setback requirements, lot coverage stuff. And for discussion, there's one about not permitted in any front yard. So sub-point 2 and 3, lop off. I think we should, because again, we don't have an ability to do that, I think. But, and I don't know if we have an ability to do number 4, but this is now the open question. How do people feel about solar panels in the front yard? Define front yard for Caroline.
I do not think that we should prescribe that.
Okay, other thoughts?
Yeah, it's not possible. It's not possible to say something like that, because what a front yard is not even clear.
Okay, and I think it's kind of not Carolinian, to coin a phrase.
No.
Okay, great. So at which point I don't know what to do with the fact that I only have one sub point, but we'll get there, and maybe it just gets tied up into there, or maybe we have another sub point we want to add. So that's something to think about. Is there anything else we want to specify about a ground mounted solar energy system? So that's food for thought as you go back over this law.
Once
Probably
you
Kristen.
specify the height, that might leave too, and then you won't have anything in that section.
Yes, that's right. But like Christmas afternoon, when you're looking for something to do, I'm just sort of thinking you guys would be scrolling through this law with a fine tooth comb. So,
And Bill, it may again be informed by the uniform siting, solar permitting for
Okay.
residential.
all right, so we'll take a look at that. Says if it says anything about where on a lot these things can be
Well,
put.
Or the height may be specified there. I don't know. I
Okay.
really don't know. I
Great.
just know we adopted it.
Okay. So then the special conditions is sort of like the heart of things. And again, this is only applying to solar energy facilities. And there's an open question here because things are happening sort of on simultaneous tracks. There is a site plan review law in place in the town. There, as of the task force report last night, a sort of proposed rewriting of that law. And one of the rewrites says that solar energy systems must go undergo site plan review. And of course, here we are saying the same thing here. I don't know about the handshaking between the two laws. I'll let the lawyer figure that out later, or not. I'm not sure what goes on. But for now, I'm trying to dump everything into this law and leaving just some amount of site plan review stuff that we probably don't need to incorporate. Again, that interaction between the two laws is something that should be looked at carefully. I just didn't have the ability to do it.
And Bill, since the site plan review law will have to be considered by the town board anyway, I guess I wouldn't worry about that at this stage of the game.
Okay, great. I'll let you
And
guys
don't
resolve it.
Remind me, does solar energy facility refer to even residential, or is that just for larger?
It does, as far as I try to keep these things in my head. It does apply, and that's why I think we may add an exemption for residential. That's basically your normal under 110% sort of thing.
Yeah, and there, maybe a more general question to ask of Lansing is, have they adopted uniform solar permitting for residential?
Okay.
Because that's something that was intended to both, make it easy for installers to put it in and not have to deal with different rules from town to town. And, to the extent that there are things here that relate to specific zoning requirements or, whatever site plan requirements in the town, that would fly in the face of uniform solar permitting, which we've adopted because we wanted to make it easy for people to put solar in.
I think
So the definition of solar energy facility in this document refers to whose components cover a land area greater than 10,000
Okay.
square feet.
all right, so that's big
Yeah.
ones.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that, Barb. Yeah, I definitely do not remember. So the residential ones would typically come under the small scale then. I think they have, that's where I get confused. They have a definition of small scale solar energy facilities and solar energy facilities, as opposed to small scale and large scale. And it may be that we want to change that to make that a little more clear for those of us with limited brain power to remember that this is a subset, not all of them. So.
And would you want to put Teaker also in that first point?
So good question. Probably. I'll just put a look. I don't know if Lansing has a Teaker, and if so, why that wasn't referenced here. But so the way this works, as I understand it, is that either in Lansing it was their planning board. For us, it would either be a review board or the town board is the lead agency in the seeker review of these projects covered by this. And so this form is getting submitted to that lead agency, and then they decide whether, if it's significant impact, then you have to give us the full report. So that's why this calls for it substantially completed, because based on the environmental assessment form, then the review board or the town board would say, yeah, you got to do a full impact assessment. But we can also reference Teaker stuff here. Makes sense. So all this is sort of basically safety stuff that the fire chief knows about it. Again, how to turn it off. There's a problem, emergency response plan. All this is,
quick question.
yeah.
Sorry, I apologize if this is just something I missed, but the site plan, if it's 10,000, what did you say? 10,000 square feet? So anything, I mean, I don't know if we care that it's like a redundancy, I guess, which is good, but anything that's that, if our current, and I know that might be changing, threshold for site plan review is a disturbance of 1 acre or more, then like, it's just kind of inherent that it's going to be under site plan review. Like, I just wonder if, is there some benefit to having it in both places? It's fine if it is, but did I miss that?
No, that's a good point, because the new site plan review reduced what triggers the site plan review from 10,000
Okay.
square feet to, I think, 3,000, and had some other changes. So that might need to be consistent with this bill. That's a good point.
Yeah.
For,
Yeah.
for commercial project.
Yes, for a commercial project and
Correct.
also for a building. I think those were square footage for buildings, and then it was site disturbance of 1 acre, as Catherine points out. I don't think the acre site disturbance got changed.
Which is not very big, I guess.
I
is my
think that's
point.
right.
1 acre is that 640 square feet, or I'm trying to remember. No, I'm off. Anyway, we should look that up. My brain's starting to.
I think it's
wear
like
out here.
43,500.
Yeah. So I mean, 10,000 is smaller than 1 acre.
Mhm.
So this is a different threshold than that. So
But for land disturbance, it's going to be, it's still to excavate for that site. You're going to exceed it anyway, if we care. I mean,
I think most facilities would be bigger. I mean, if you're building a community solar site, you're on acres of land. But this was just trying to do the catch-all that even if you're not doing like a big community solar project, we still want you to come to us if you're just, building something that's 10,000 square feet. I don't know what the right threshold is, so I think you raise a good point, but I think it is smaller than that acre disturbance, so maybe appropriate.
It's a quarter of an acre. essentially.
Yeah.
Doesn't apply to building, to rooftops, right?
So
Doesn't
yeah,
apply
there's
to
an interesting disconnect here that I forgot to mention. So the Lansing law assumes that any solar energy facility, which as they described was bigger than 10,000 square feet, was on the ground. And that's likely true in Caroline, but I honestly wondered in Lansing, if you put stuff on top of the mall, how big would that be? So
Well,
it's one of my questions is whether
Have
we
you
want to make.
been,
Go ahead, Will.
I can tell you how big it would be, Bill. You've seen my place. The tops of all the garages there, that's 10,000 square feet. 3 buildings equals 10,000 square feet there. It's 3 barns, basically, or 2 barns. That's
Yeah.
why I asked, because I wondered could you have a farm with 10,000 square feet of barns, and a farmer wants to put the installation on his roof? I don't know, how do you count it?
Right. So I think that's an excellent question. And I had flagged that in somewhere along the line. I want to put that in our list of questions to look at. Let's look at the definition of solar energy facility, because to me, it doesn't have to be I think there ought to be some review if it's not on the ground. So we may want to adjust that definition. We're approaching 6:40. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Well,
say.
I think we need to wrap up as soon as possible.
Yeah, right. I
Yes,
just
that's what
wanted
we're
to-
doing.
The other meeting.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say, I agree with you that that it's not very clear that it should go beyond actually. I mean, when they say all solar energy facilities, probably actually, now that I think about it, ties back into the independent battery issue. Those battery things are about the size of tractor trailers often.
Yeah.
And the thing is that one can imagine actually having one that is off-site, on a different site, right? And that's maybe what that technically those batteries might themselves be solar energy facilities.
Okay. So here's what I suggest, because we do need to get off this. So what we did with the planning board in the past is we had documents on a Google Doc thing where everyone could then go to them. And so what I will do in the next few days or something is sort of merge all some of the questions we raised today, some of the questions I already had from various sources, put them in one document and put them there and send you all a link to that. Now I'm really, really bad at Google Docs, so I'm hoping this is all going to work. But what I would want planning board members to do then is go in there and claim some of those questions, put your name next to it, and then go do some work on it between now and the next meeting, which is the second Thursday in January. I do, there is obviously, Christmas and New Year's in between. So there's going to be limited time. But since none of your families are coming to see you, you'll have lots of time to do that stuff. I did want to say that I personally have some ambivalence over solar farms and large facilities like that, because we've just passed this comprehensive plan that extolled the virtues of open space, meaning unbuilt on space. And these things obviously build on a lot of space. But at the same time, we have strong statements about renewable energy and strong statements about preserving farmland. And we heard from a farmer last night saying, I could, by putting this on part of my land, that gave me an income stream so I could keep farming the rest of my land. And so that plus the sentiment of, well, if we want to preserve farmland for future use, maybe something like a solar panel for the next 20 or 30 years is a great way to preserve that land for future use, assuming that you really can pull those panels off and still use the farmland. So for me, that last question is a key one to whether how wholeheartedly I will jump on the bandwagon here. But it's a difficult question for me, and I think for Caroline, because these things can take up a lot of area. So with that very rosy picture, let's close the meeting. I'm going to put stuff on a Google Doc and hope that some work happens between now and the next meeting. And then we'll close this down so the planning board, so the town board can have their hearing. But if anybody else wants to make a quick closing remark, I'm going to open the floor up for that.
I could just offer the context if it depends on what you're comparing it to. If we're comparing open space with nothing on it to solar farms, that's one perspective. If we're comparing a solar farm to a housing development, that's quite another perspective.
Yep.
I'd like to make a suggestion, because I feel that my remarks are based on something, and maybe it would be good if I just made my remarks and provided the basis for them. Those can be succinct, and it's actually easier and quicker for folks on the committee to see what I'm saying if I do a summary that way than if I try to explain it verbally.
That's excellent. I am all for
I
written
think that
stuff.
would. Okay.
That sounds great. And I hope we will do a bunch of stuff, written by email that then gets discussed more in person to help, hash out final details. Okay, I think we should adjourn the meeting and allow the town board to start theirs. Okay, so thank you everyone for your participation, and we'll see you, if not in a few minutes, I'll see you in a month.
Thanks.